I'm Abigail. This is James, and welcome to another Two Kids interview.
We are joined today by award-winning author Dusti Bowling.
Ms. Bowling's books include insignificant events in the life of a cactus,
Momentous events in the life of a cactus,
the canyon's edge across the desert,
the Aven Green series,
and coming out in 4 weeks from now is the book Dust.
Thank you for being with us today.
You write children's books. How are your books influenced by your own childhood?
Oh, wow. Well, my childhood greatly influences all of my books. So many child experiences that I had, things that impacted me throughout my life, things that I know a lot of kids are dealing with. You'll notice in some of my books, like Across the Desert, my main character, she has anxiety and other things that I've dealt with throughout my life. And her mom also is struggling with drug addiction, which I also grew up with. And then in The Canyon's Edge, my main character has some trauma that she's trying to recover from, which I spent a great deal of my childhood trying to overcome traumas that I had experienced as a child. So definitely my childhood informs a lot of my characters, a lot of their struggles, the things that they're facing, and things that I know a lot of kids are facing today.
Did you write a lot as a child?
Actually, I didn't. I read all the time, though. I read constantly. I was a huge reader. You two strike me as probably being readers too. Are you big readers? Yeah. So I was a huge reader. I read all the time. I was a complete weirdo in my family because no one else read. And they would always be like, Dusty, why you just do nothing but read? And even to this day, they always, when they talk about me as a kid, remember all you did was read. And so I always loved stories. I always loved reading, but I never thought that I could ever become a published author. So I didn't actually even start writing till I was almost 30 years old. And up until that point, I did a bunch of other things. I was a teacher for a while. And so I went to college, but I didn't get a writing degree or study writing or anything like that. But I was always a big reader. And I truly believe that if you're always a big reader, you can become a writer at any time, because that is the best writing education you can ever give yourself.
How do you come up with ideas for your books?
Well, ideas can come from anywhere. They do frequently come from my own childhood and experiences I had. They come a lot from Arizona. If you've read many of my books, you know I write a lot about Arizona. I love Arizona. I was born and raised in Arizona. I live in Arizona now. And so Arizona is a very special place to me. I think it is the best state, although probably not everyone would agree with that. It's a very interesting, diverse state, and it gives me tons of story ideas. But, I always have to keep my eyes open to them, which means spending as little time online as possible. I'm not watching lots of YouTube videos, which I do tend to do way too much, and trying to stay off social media and just being aware of my surroundings and the world around me, because you never know when a story idea might come along. So just reading a lot, spending a lot of time outside, spending time exploring, and just always keeping my mind kind of free and open from all the online noise to, be ready when a story idea comes along.
You have written books where characters have disabilities.
Do you think they are most important for people with disabilities so they can see themselves in books?
Or more important for people without disabilities so they can learn from it and be able to understand and empathize?
What a good question. I actually think it's equally important that books are both a mirror and a window for people. And so I think for people to be able to see themselves in books represented authentically and realistically. As you can see, I do write a lot of books about a character named Aven who doesn't have arms, and I myself have arms. So yeah, so when I was writing those books, I had a big responsibility to do a lot of research, connect with people without arms, share my work with them, and learn as much as I could to make Aven as realistic and accurate and respectful as I possibly could. So I do always run my stories by people with those disabilities to make sure that I have done the best job that I can do, make sure they approve of the representation. And they do love seeing people like them in books, and they even share my books with children who have that same disability because they think it's so important for those children to see themselves in books. And I do too. But also I do want people to learn a lot about different life experiences, people who have not had those experiences. For example, I put Connor into the books, the Cactus books, because my daughters and my husband all have tic disorders. And so a lot of people don't know very much about tic disorders. They don't know a lot about Tourette syndrome, which is what Connor has. There's a lot of stereotyping surrounding it, that it's just people shouting bad words and all of these things that make people just not understand what it is, so that when they meet a person with a real tic disorder, they can be hurtful even when they don't intend to be, because they have all these wrong ideas about what it is. So I created Connor so that people could better understand that disability, so that when they come across people with real tic disorders and real Tourette syndrome, they would be more understanding. And that, in a way, that's really beneficial for people with disabilities as well. So yeah, it's definitely for both reasons that I think it's really important to have people with these disabilities in books.
What is your process when putting a book together?
Do you decide the end before the middle?
Or do you put it together in order?
That's a really good question. I actually don't write my books in order ever, really, hardly ever. And I frequently will write my endings first, because I do think that the ending is the most important part of the story. What do you guys think? You think the ending's really important, or do you think the beginning's most important? What are your personal feelings on that?
Well, when I write comics, I make these small comics that my friend Edwin at school gave me. Well, he didn't give me the idea, but he was writing these books about this guy named Joe. So I basically just took my notebook and made him an FBI.
I usually think that they're both kind of the same, because the beginning sets up the plot, and the ending ends it and shows what the lesson is. So
And I always know that I start from the beginning, but then I know at the same time what's gonna happen at the end.
Yeah, that's really good. I think it's great to have an end goal in mind, so that you're always kind of on track with your story. So I do think beginnings are super important, because that's what's going to pull your reader in, right? And make them want to read your story. But when you leave a book, I think the ending really, in the end, is the most important part, because if I'm reading a book and I think this book is really interesting and it's really pulled me in and it's really good, and then the ending just is a huge disappointment, I usually leave that book feeling like I didn't really like that book in the end after all. And I'm not probably going to recommend it to my friends. Whereas if I'm reading a book and I'm like, this book's okay, I'm going to stick with it, I'm going to see where it's going, and then the ending just blows my mind, I'm going to come away loving that book. I'm going to recommend that book to my friends because it surprised me in the end that it was that good. So my personal feelings are that the end is the most important part of a book. So I won't even write a book unless I know what the ending is, and it's got to be really good. So I will frequently outline my books before I write them. And I will make sure that I have a really good ending, a really good climax. And then I need certain other key points in my story. Like there's this part of the story called The Dark Night of the Soul and All is Lost, where you ever notice how in a movie or in a story about 3/4 of the way through, everything just goes terribly, just like the worst. And your main character it's like, this is the worst point in their whole life. Nothing could get worse than it is now. So that is the all is lost part of a story. And you'll find it in just about every story. So I want to know what that is. And that's really important to me. And then just a few, like the inciting incident, that's toward the beginning. That is the point that sets your character on their plot path and sets them on their journey. So there are a few points I need to know. And then after I outline my story, I will write a first draft. And then I have to write many drafts after that.
Can you tell us about a time where you were doing something and noticed someone or something and thought, I need to put that in a book?
Definitely. I'm very much inspired by the things going on around me, the things in my life. Even the kind of music I'm listening to can make its way into my story. It did in 2 of my books already. So in the canyon's edge, I was listening to a lot of Beatles music, and I started making connections between the lyrics and what I was writing. And so I put the Beatles into my book. And then in momentous events, I was listening to a lot of punk rock because I love punk rock. And I started thinking that would be really fun to have Aven sort of like discover punk rock. And so that made its way into my book. Or I might visit places and think, wow, this would be really cool to put into a story. Or I hear my kids say something really funny and I write it down and I slip that into a book. So definitely I'm influenced by all kinds of things going on around me. And definitely things can make their way into my book.
Mentioned after your first draft you revise a lot. How much is a lot?
Well, that's a good question. I spend more time revising than I usually spend writing my first draft. That's probably surprising to hear. So I would say on average with most of my books, I spend around 3 months or so writing a first draft, but I might spend 6 months revising that book. And during that time, I'll write anywhere between 5, I'd say, to 7 drafts on average, starting with really big plot issues and plot problems, big picture stuff that I need to really change. And then you start narrowing it down with each draft where you're like revising just lines and things like that. So revision is really, really important for writers.
Back to the other question where you were talking about that music in your book. In one of the Aven Green books, I saw that it said Raining Tacos and The Song That Never Ends. Those are two of songs that I really, really like.
I know. I try to slip a little bit of stuff in there that I think kids can really relate to. And even though I don't put a lot of really current pop culture references into my books, but for that one, I just really, the Raining Tacos thing, I thought this will probably last a while.
When you decided to become a children's author, did you worry at all if you could do it?
Definitely. I mean, I put off doing it for so long because I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think it was possible for me to become a published author. Like that just seemed like such a huge thing, like that I could never do. Like, I mean, how could I ever make a living off of becoming a children's author and have lots of kids reading my books? I didn't think I could. And even when I started writing, I still had this mindset of, well, I'm going to just do this for me and I'm going to try, because if I don't try, I will spend the rest of my life regretting it and always wondering, why didn't I try? And what if I had tried? And even though I was still pretty convinced I would never get published, I thought at least I'll know for the rest of my life that I tried and I did my best. And it was impossible. Like I thought it would be. And it was actually really, really hard for me to get published. I started writing when I was around 28-ish, so almost 30 years old. And then my first book did not get published until I was 37. So it took around 9 years of practicing and learning and writing lots of failed manuscripts, and even self-publishing some stuff just kind of for fun and things like that. Just a lot of learning and growing before I finally had a book idea, which was Insignificant Events in Life of a Cactus, that I really, really tried super hard, as hard as I could to get published. And it was really hard. That book ended up getting rejected 116 times before it got published. And it took 3 years of rewrites and revisions before it got published. So it was hard to break into publishing, but you know what? It wasn't impossible, like I always told myself.
What writer has had the most influence on you?
Oh, so a lot of writers I love, kidlit writers that I love are like I love Catherine Applegate. I think she writes really amazing books. I love Kate DiCamillo. I love Jason Reynolds. So many books. I have some books back here that I really like, things that have had a big impact on me. These are some more of my favorite books. So Rebecca Stead and When You Reach Me, this is a book I love so much. And a lot of these people have an influence on my writing. Louis Sacker, like, who wrote Holes. I love Holes. I think that's such a great book. So, and then, yeah, so lots of, E.B. White, of course, from my childhood. Anne Martin from my childhood, who wrote The Babysitter's Club as well. Yeah, lots of authors.
What advice do you have for young people who want to write?
My best advice for young people who want to write is to read as much as possible because, like I said earlier, I didn't even start writing till I was almost 30 years old, but I was always a big reader, and that wired my brain to be able to tell stories. So read a lot, read the books that you enjoy, because that's probably the kind of books you're going to want to write. And then just practice, of course, if you want to write. Like I said, I didn't really practice at all until I started writing at almost 30, but it definitely can help you a lot if you start practicing before I did.
That's big advice.
Do you also have a smaller tip for something you do when you are writing?
That maybe a lot of people don't.
Well, I don't know that a lot of people don't do this, but I sort of briefly mentioned earlier that I do outline my stories before I write them, and that helps me a lot. I think that a lot of kids, when they start writing, they have an idea. It's probably an exciting idea, and they start working. They just start from the beginning. They start writing their story, and after 2, 3, 4 pages, maybe they get stuck. Have you guys ever had that happen to you before, where you start writing a story, you get stuck? It happens to a lot of people, and I think it just helps a lot to have that roadmap, that outline, so that when you get stuck, you think, well, I don't know what to do with this part, but I do know that I'm really excited about this part in the middle, and I'm going to write this scene. So I jump around because I get stuck too. So I'll jump around and I'll write this midpoint part, or I'll write this scene with this other character that I think is really good. And then before you know it, I have all these scenes written that I was really excited about, and I can kind of start to connect them. So that helps if you know kind of your story beforehand, that you can jump around, write the scenes you're excited about. And I definitely write my stories totally out of order. Like I said, I'll write my endings frequently first, then my beginnings. Then I might write some midpoint, some other key scenes throughout, and then I kind of piece it all together like a puzzle in the end, because it just helps to keep me motivated to work on the scenes that I'm most excited about at that moment. And then yeah.
Thank you for that advice, because let's just say there's been a lot of paper wasted at my house.
Yeah, that's a lot of writers. That's every writer.
Which of your books do you think would make the best movie?
That's a good question. I think a lot of people would probably choose Insignificant Events in Life of Cactus to be made into a movie. But honestly, if I looked at all my books and I had to choose one book to be made into a movie, the one I would probably pick is a surprise for most people, but it's 24 Hours in Nowhere, which is not my most popular book at all by far. But I think it has all the makings of a really fun movie. And I thought of it as a movie as I was writing it. And I wanted it to be like a modern day Goonies, which is one of my favorite movies from my childhood. And so I like to write my books a lot in a sort of like a cinematic way. I'm thinking of them like a screenplay in some ways, and writing them like a movie. And especially that one. That one I think would make a really fun movie. I mean, it's got so much in it that you could do such fun stuff. I mean, it's got dirt bike racing in it. It's got caves in it. It's got mine collapses. It's got, death defying, all kinds of things going on. And it just goes like 100 miles an hour from the time the kids decide to go into the mine to find that gold. It's just going nonstop. And so I think it would make for a really fun movie. I hope it does become a movie one day. Maybe. We'll see.
Finally, it's time for our Turbo 10.
10 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'll try to be.
Number 1, what is your favorite phrase to use?
Of probably what the heck in my books. What the?
Number 2, what is one subject you'd love to learn more about?
Gosh, I don't know. Maybe the Old West. I'm thinking of writing some Old West stories, and so I want to incorporate a lot more of the Old West, which I don't know as much about as I should.
Number 3, what is your go-to snack food?
Oh, fruit or like carrots or vegetables. I eat pretty healthy. I don't eat a ton of snack foods, but I love watermelon when it's in season. I'm eating a lot of watermelon right now.
Number 4, what was your favorite book growing up?
Oh, probably the one I showed you, Charlotte's Web. Or Where the Red Fern Grows. Maybe that one actually.
Number 5, if you could teleport somewhere right now, where would you go?
I'd probably go to Bryce Canyon. That's one of my favorite places. I haven't been in a couple of years.
Number 6. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
I would love to probably stop time or not have to sleep or be invisible. Those would all be good. That's hard to pick one.
Number 7. What is your favorite cartoon as a kid?
My favorite cartoon as a kid. I did love Scooby-Doo. Yeah, you'll notice I reference it a few times in my books.
Number 8. What is your favorite rainy day activity?
Oh, definitely reading. Well, it rains so seldom here in Arizona. Oh my gosh, we love it when it rains. I would probably just sitting out on my porch, enjoying the cooler weather and the smell of the rain, and probably reading a book.
Number 9. If you could have any 3 dinner guests, who would they be?
Any 3 dinner guests, who would they be? Living?
There's no rules.
Yeah.
No rules. Okay. Goodness, gosh, these are hard questions, you guys, actually. So I would love to meet maybe one of the authors I love, maybe Anne Martin, or Judy Bloom, she'd be a really interesting dinner guest. And then if it's living or dead, I would probably have to invite my grandparents, my grandma and grandpa.
Number 10. What was the best piece of advice that you were ever given?
Best piece of advice I was ever given. Wow. Probably the same piece of advice I give to a lot of kids, which is just to keep reading. It's really, really important to keep reading, even if you don't want to be a writer. And I've been given this piece of advice as an adult, and I still think it's the best piece of advice, to lower my screen time and spend less time on social media and online and read more books. So those kind of go together. More books, less screen time.
You did great. Thank you so much for doing that.
And thank you for spending time with us today.
We appreciate it so much.
And we can't wait to read your future books.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I think you two are great interviewers. I'm super impressed with all the people that you've had on your show. And I hope that your show is really successful and you're able to interview a lot more people.